Sarah Thompson was not the kind of woman who ever gave up easily. She had grown up around engines, oil, and the smell of rubber. Her father had been a mechanic all his life, and his small garage had been the heart of their town for more than 30 years. When he passed away, Sarah decided to keep his dream alive. She took over the garage, working from sunrise until late night, doing everything she could to keep the business running. Her garage sat at the edge of a quiet Texas town. It wasn't fancy, just a metal building with peeling paint, a few toolboxes, and 2 lifts that groaned every time they were used. The sign out front read, "Thompson Auto Repair, honest work, honest price." And that was exactly how Sarah lived her life. She wasn't rich, but she was proud. She fixed cars for people who couldn't always afford the big city shops. Sometimes she let them pay in parts, sometimes in kindness. She had learned long ago that helping people mattered more than counting money. One hot summer afternoon, the sound of an old truck echoed down the road. The engine coughed and sputtered like it was taking its last breath. Sarah wiped her hands on a rag and stepped outside to see who it was. The truck pulled into her driveway, rusty and worn, its blue paint faded almost gray. When the door opened, an older man stepped out slowly. He wore a faded army cap and an old jacket despite the heat. His eyes were kind but tired. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said with a small nod. "Heard you're the one to see about getting a truck running again." Sarah smiled warmly. "That's what I do best."
"What seems to be the trouble?"
The man introduced himself as James Miller, a retired Army veteran who had lived in the town for only a few months. He told her the truck had been with him for years, since he came home from service. It was more than just a vehicle. It was a part of his life, a memory of every road he had traveled, but now it refused to start properly. As Sarah listened, she noticed how carefully he spoke, as if he didn't want to sound like he was complaining. He looked at his truck the way someone might look at an old friend, or with affection and worry. She told him to leave it with her for the day. After he walked to a nearby diner for lunch, Sarah got to work. She opened the hood, and immediately she could tell it was in bad shape. The radiator was leaking, the transmission belt was cracked, and several wires were loose. The tires were nearly bald, and the brakes squeaked at every push. She sighed quietly. "This poor thing's been through a lot," she murmured. Hours passed as she made a full inspection. When James returned, she called him over and gently explained everything. "Mr. Miller," she said kindly, "the truck needs a lot of work. The parts and labor together will be expensive." He nodded slowly, looking down. "I figured as much," he said softly. "I don't have much saved up, but maybe you can fix just the engine for now. I'll manage the rest later." Sarah looked at him for a moment. She could see the hesitation in his eyes, the quiet pride of a man who had always tried to take care of himself but was struggling now. In that moment, she remembered her father's words. If someone served others all their life, you serve them back when they need it. So she made a decision. "Mr. Miller," she said, "you've done your share of hard work for this country. Let me handle this one. You don't owe me anything." He blinked, unsure he'd heard her right. "No charge?" he asked in disbelief. Sarah shook her head. "No charge. I'll get it running like new. Consider it my way of saying thank you." For a long second, James didn't say anything. His lips trembled slightly and his eyes glistened with quiet emotion. "Ma'am, I can't let you do that," he said finally. "I can at least pay something." But Sarah smiled softly. "You've already paid, sir. Maybe not to me, but to all of us." James swallowed hard and nodded. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. "Then don't say anything," she replied gently. "Just promise me you'll drive safely once it's fixed." That evening, after closing time, Sarah stayed late in the shop. The sun sank behind the hills, and the golden light faded into a deep orange glow across the floor. The sound of her tools echoed in the quiet night. She worked carefully, replacing every damaged part, cleaning the engine and tightening every bolt. Her hands were covered in grease, but she didn't mind. She wanted to make sure the old truck would run perfectly. Her apprentice, a young man named Kyle, peeked his head in and said, "You really gonna fix that thing for free, boss?" Sarah nodded without looking up. "Yeah, some things you don't do for money, Kyle. You do them because they're right." Kyle smiled and went home, leaving her alone in the hum of the shop. It took 2 full days to finish the repairs. Sarah even managed to find used tires that were almost new, donated by a friend who ran a tire shop nearby. When she was done, the truck looked cleaner, brighter, and far more alive than before. When James came to pick it up, he stopped in disbelief. "That can't be my truck," he said, laughing softly. "It looks brand new," Sarah chuckled. "Go ahead, take her for a spin." He climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life smoothly. No coughing, no sputtering. The sound made him smile like a child hearing an old song again. When he stepped out, there were tears in his eyes. "You're an angel, Sarah," he said sincerely. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," she replied with a shrug. "Just take care of yourself, Mr. Miller." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a few crumpled bills and maybe $50, and tried to hand them to her. "Please, at least this much," he insisted. But Sarah closed his hand gently and pushed it back toward him. "No, sir, keep it. Maybe get yourself a nice meal instead." He looked at her for a long time, then nodded, clearly moved. "People like you remind me why I fought for this country," he said softly. Sarah felt her heart warm at those words. She smiled as he got into the truck and drove away down the dusty road, the sun shining off the hood she had polished with care. For the next few days, she couldn't stop thinking about him. There was something peaceful in the memory of his smile. She didn't do it for attention, but knowing she had helped someone who had given so much made her feel proud. Business at the garage went on as usual. She fixed a few cars, helped an elderly lady replace her flat tire for free, and even repaired a young man's scooter that wouldn't start. That was how Sarah lived, quietly, kindly, and with purpose. One evening as she was closing up, Kyle asked her, "You think that veteran will come back someday?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Maybe, maybe not. But that's not the point." "What's the point then?" he asked curiously. She looked up at the darkening sky, her eyes soft. "The point is, kindness doesn't need to come back. It just needs to go somewhere." Kyle nodded slowly, not fully understanding but knowing she was right. Weeks passed, and life went on as normal. Sarah still woke up early every morning, made her coffee, tied her hair back, and opened the garage. Sometimes she would glance at the road, wondering how James was doing. She never expected anything from him. In fact, she had forgotten all about the free repair by the time something extraordinary was about to happen. That quiet morning would start like any other. Sarah would open the garage door, the smell of fuel filling the air. She would grab her tools, ready for another day of hard work. But what she didn't know was that life was preparing to surprise her in a way she could never imagine. A way that would prove that every good deed, no matter how small, always finds its way back home. The morning sun had just started to rise when Sarah Thompson unlocked the door of her garage. The air smelled of fresh dew and the world was calm and quiet. She flipped the lights on, set down her cup of coffee, and began her daily routine, checking appointments, arranging tools, and warming up the air compressor. Everything felt like an ordinary morning. She didn't know that this day would turn out to be one she would never forget. As she stepped outside to pull up the big rolling door, she heard the sound of a heavy vehicle approaching. It wasn't the usual noise of a customer's car or delivery van. It was deeper, heavier, like a truck pulling a load. She turned her head toward the road and saw a large flatbed trailer slowing down right in front of her shop. The driver stepped out and waved. "Are you Miss Thompson?" "Yes," she replied, confused. "Can I help you?" He smiled kindly. "I've got a delivery for you." Sarah blinked. "A delivery? I didn't order anything." The man chuckled softly. "Well, this one's already paid for. All I was told is that it belongs to you." Puzzled, Sarah walked closer. On the trailer sat a brand new silver pickup truck, shining like a mirror in the sunlight. It looked stunning, polished, spotless, and clearly expensive. She stared at it, not believing what she was seeing. This must be a mistake," she said quietly. The driver shook his head and handed her a white envelope with her name written neatly in cursive letters. "No mistake, ma'am. This came with the truck. Says for Sarah." Her fingers trembled slightly as she took the envelope. She could tell the handwriting was old-fashioned and careful, written by someone who had taken their time. She slowly opened it and unfolded the letter inside. The paper was thick and the ink slightly smudged as if written with emotion. She began to read. "Dear Sarah, when I came to your shop a few weeks ago, I was at one of the hardest points in my life. My old truck was more than just a vehicle. It was my last reminder of the life I had before everything started to change. I didn't tell you, but after leaving the service, things were not easy. I had lost many things I cared about, and that truck was all I had left that made me feel free. When you repaired it without asking for a single dollar, you didn't just fix a truck. You fixed my faith in people. You reminded me that kindness still exists in this world. I told my son about you. He runs a dealership in another town, and when he heard what you did, he said, "Dad, we have to do something for her." So here it is, a small token of our thanks. The truck on the trailer is yours. It's brand new, fully covered, and registered under your name. It's our way of saying that your heart made a difference. Please keep doing what you do. Helping people, spreading kindness, and fixing not just cars but lives. With endless gratitude, James Miller. Sarah stood there motionless. The words blurred as her eyes filled with tears. She pressed the letter to her chest, speechless. For a long time she couldn't move. The driver waited quietly, then finally said, "So, ma'am, where would you like me to unload your new truck?" Sarah blinked, her voice shaking. "You're serious? This is really mine?" He nodded with a grin. "Sure is." Mr. Miller and his son made sure all the papers were signed and delivered. Her employees, Kyle and another mechanic named Brenda, had gathered outside. They stared in shock as the shiny silver truck rolled gently off the trailer. The sunlight hit its polished hood, making it gleam like silver water. Kyle whistled. "Whoa, is that for you, boss?" Sarah nodded slowly, still trying to take it in. "I guess it is," Brenda smiled warmly. "That's what you get for having a heart of gold." Sarah laughed softly, though tears still ran down her cheeks. "I didn't do it for this," she whispered. "I just wanted to help." "That's exactly why you deserve it," Brenda replied. Sarah walked around the new truck, running her hand along its smooth surface. Every detail, from the shining wheels to the leather seats inside, spoke of care and gratitude. On the dashboard there was another small envelope. Inside was a photograph of James standing beside his old truck, smiling proudly. On the back of the photo he had written, "Now I can rest easy knowing my friend has a ride worthy of her heart." That single sentence made Sarah's tears fall freely. She sat quietly in the driver's seat for a few moments, feeling the soft leather under her hands. She thought about the first day she met James, the faded cap, the weary eyes, and the way he had thanked her with such honesty. She whispered to herself, "You didn't have to do this, James, but thank you." The story of what happened spread quickly through the town. People started talking about the local mechanic who fixed a veteran's truck for free, and how he had returned the kindness with an unbelievable gift. Local newspapers covered the story, and soon strangers came to meet her. Reporters asked her why she did it. Sarah always gave the same answer. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what felt right." Sometimes doing something kind without expecting anything in return is the most beautiful thing you can do. Her business began to grow after that. People came from nearby towns not just to get their cars fixed, but to meet the woman whose kindness had touched so many hearts. Customers brought her homemade pies, flowers, and thank you notes. Some even told her their own stories, how they too had been helped by strangers when they needed it most. But Sarah remained humble. She never showed off the new truck. In fact, for weeks she kept parking it in the back, still using her old car for errands. She didn't want anyone to think she helped people for rewards. For her, the real treasure was the friendship she had formed and the message behind it. One afternoon she received a letter from James again. It was short but full of warmth. "Dear Sarah, I hope the truck is treating you well. I wanted you to know that every time I see someone doing a good deed, I think of you. You reminded me that small acts can heal big hearts. You didn't just fix my truck. You fixed a piece of my life that was broken. With respect and friendship, James." Sarah framed that letter and hung it on the wall of her office right beside her father's photograph. Whenever she felt tired or overwhelmed, she would look at it and remember why she started her garage. Not for money, but to make a difference in someone's life. Over the next few months, she made a habit of doing one free repair every month for someone in need. Sometimes it was a single mother struggling with her car payment. Sometimes an old farmer whose tractor had stopped working. She never told anyone about it. She just did it quietly, the same way she had helped James Kyle. Her apprentice noticed one day and said, "You really believe in this kindness comes back thing, don't you?" Sarah smiled softly. "I don't do it so it comes back. I do it because I want it to go forward." He grinned. "You're something else, boss," she laughed. Maybe, but it feels good, doesn't it? He nodded. Yeah, it really does. One winter morning, several months later, a small package arrived at her shop. There was no return address, just her name written neatly on the top. Inside was a small wooden plaque carved with the words, "Goodness travels in circles. You sent it out and it came back to you." Sarah smiled as she ran her fingers over the carving. She didn't know who had sent it, but somehow, she knew the message was true. Every time she started her silver truck, she thought of James. Sometimes she would drive out to the countryside, roll down the window and feel the wind against her face. It reminded her of freedom, of kindness, of life's unexpected gifts. She often told young mechanics who came to work for her, "Fixing cars is easy. Fixing hearts takes more effort. But that's the part that matters most." And every single person who worked in her garage carried that lesson forward. Years later, when people in the town told stories about Sarah Thompson, they didn't just talk about how skilled she was. They talked about her heart, how she helped people without expecting anything, and how her simple act of repairing a veteran's truck had changed not only her life, but also inspired hundreds of others. Her shop became known as a place of honesty, kindness, and community. There was a small framed photo hanging near the entrance, a smiling veteran in a faded army cap, standing next to his shiny old truck. Below it, in golden letters, were the words, "One act of kindness can start a chain that never ends." Sarah often stood under that picture, remembering that one afternoon when she chose compassion over profit. She would smile quietly, knowing that the world could always use a little more kindness, and that sometimes a simple act like fixing a broken truck could heal more than just metal and wheels. And every evening, when she locked up the garage and the sun dipped below the horizon, she would walk past her new silver truck, touch the hood gently, and whisper a small thank you, not just to James but to the power of kindness itself.